For years now, the institution of marriage has been one of the last great bastions of opposition to LGBT rights in the United States. The idea that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that letting same-sex couples marry will be a slippery slope to other abominations like interspecies marriage, has been the rallying cry of homophobic conservatives across the country. But like other outdated social mores before it, the tide is turning against this sentiment, and the time is now ripe for a concerted push for equal rights for LGBT people. That is why in this debate I ask that you affirm that same-sex marriage should be the top priority of the LGBT civil rights movement. I will advance two main arguments in support of this proposition. The first is that marriage endows certain fundamental human rights, and that an effective social movement would be remiss to deny those rights to its constituents. The second is that the achievement of legalization of same-sex marriage would promote social benefits to LGBT people. First, I want to talk about rights. Marriage in this country is more than a name. A married couple is entitled to enormous legal benefits, most of which are denied to LGBT couples under the current system. A gay man cannot legally receive his partner's pension after his death because they are not married. A lesbian woman cannot use her partner's work insurance to pay for her medical costs because they are not married. A transsexual cannot make medical decisions for his or her husband or wife because they are not married. This is often true even in states in which same-sex marriage or civil unions are legal, because those contracts are not enforceable outside of the state if that couple decides to or is forced to move. These rights are not just for the economic benefit of LGBT people. The right to be recognized as people who are in a loving, committed relationship, the same as heterosexual marriage, is a fundamental one. Even the Declaration of Independence recognizes that the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is unalienable. Any social movement must prioritize these fundamental rights first, or risk losing its legitimacy as a voice for its people. The second argument I will advance relates to more subtle, but no less important, social benefits. As I mentioned in the beginning of my speech, the concept of marriage has become the focal point of opposition to broader LGBT rights within our country. As long as the political right can point to federal laws that codify the exclusion of LGBT people from society, they will be able to maintain their strength in the fight against equality. However, this strategy presents an opportunity that the LGBT movement can exploit. Because conservatives have made marriage the key issue in their fight against LGBT rights, they have given the issue a new form of power. They have set up a binary where as long as same-sex marriage is illegal, then LGBT people cannot be included in society. But the flip side of that is that if the federal government were to recognize the right of LGBT people to marry, it would legitimize the entire concept that the LGBT lifestyle is acceptable. By demolishing the symbolic power of the conservative argument, the LGBT movement would set itself up for great advances in other areas of discrimination. A society in which federal law protected the fundamental right of LGBT people to marry will be less inclined to discriminate in areas such as employment, and also less likely to turn a blind eye to the violence that is committed against LGBT people every day. This argument is borne out by the lessons of the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. The decision in Brown v. Board of Education and the passage of the Civil Rights Act were not only intrinsically valuable, but they also demonstrated to society at large that inequality based on race was unacceptable in any aspect of life. And while we cannot expect to abolish all racism, this message was still a substantial shift in cultural thinking about race. Similarly, although homophobia will never be completely gone, we can still hope to legitimize the LGBT lifestyle and diminish the discrimination and violence that LGBT people face. For these reasons, I ask that you affirm.